You've come back to Bellewood. The lanterns are lit, and the fire's glow spills across the tavern floor. Sit closer now. Let the hearth tell you a story.
The storm had come on fast. One moment, the road was hard-packed and sure. The next, it vanished under drifts of blowing snow. She pushed open my door with stiff fingers, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Snow fell from her boots in clumps, melting on my rush-covered floorboards. For a moment, she stood there, blinking against the sudden wash of light and warmth, her breath rising in faint clouds before her lips. She was young still, though her face carried a certain drawn quality, like linen left in the sun too long. A widow, I later learned. But I didn't need to be told. I've held enough sorrow in these rooms to recognize its weight when it walks through my door. Across the room, a man sat near the fire, boots stretched toward the heat, a tankard in hand. He had come earlier, shaking snow from his coat with the ease of one accustomed to the cold. His shoulders were broad beneath his woolen coat, his hands rough with work. A blacksmith, strong and silent, as they often are. He lifted his head when she entered, his eyes catching the candlelight in a way that seemed almost shy. Then, quietly, he stood and pulled out the chair nearest his own. "You'll want the fire," he said, his voice low but steady. "Storm's gone bad out there." She hesitated, then nodded. The shawl slipped slightly from her shoulders as she moved forward, releasing the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke. They sat for a time without speaking, the fire filling the silence with its quiet murmur. The innkeeper brought mulled cider in pewter mugs, the cinnamon-sweet aroma curling into the air. This hearth has burned every day for near 50 winters, I wanted to tell them. Its stones have warmed travelers, lovers, soldiers, children. You are not the first to sit here heavy with unspoken words, and you will not be the last. She cupped her hands around the mug, fingers pale against the warm metal. He watched her, though not boldly, his gaze flickering like candlelight, unsure whether to linger or retreat. Didn't expect the storm to come so fast, she said finally, her voice soft. They do that here, he replied. Wind off the ridge can bury the road in a blink. Best to wait it out. He shifted slightly in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. I know that sound well. It's the sound of a man uncertain whether to speak or stay silent. You're from Bellewood? She asked. Aye. Forge is down by the mill stream. You make the iron hinges for these doors? She asked, her hand brushing over the wrought latch. And the hooks by the hearth. Made the poker, too, he said, nodding toward the fire. Things meant to last. Her lips curved faintly, not a smile exactly, but something close. The fire crackled as she leaned back, eyes scanning the room. Rushes lay scattered across the floor to catch stray embers and spills, a practice as old as the tavern itself. Beeswax candles dripped slow rivulets down brass holders. Above the mantel, a simple stencil design, vines and leaves curling delicately, softened the rough plaster walls. Taverns like this were more than alehouses, I thought. They were waypoints on winter roads, gathering places for news and laughter, and sometimes for hearts to find each other again. The fire popped gently, as if in approval of the quiet that had settled between them. The widow shifted slightly in her chair, the worn Russia seat creaking faintly under her weight. Outside, the night wind moaned across the tavern's roof, carrying with it the faint scent of wet earth and wood smoke. For a time, neither spoke. She was the first to break the silence. Does the fire feel warmer to you than it did an hour ago? She asked. Her voice soft, careful not to disturb the hush too harshly. The blacksmith turned his gaze from the flames to her, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I expect it feels warmer because we've stopped pacing in our minds. She tilted her head, curious. Pacing in our minds? He nodded once. A habit I've noticed in people. When they're in company they don't yet trust. Their words pace like restless feet, never settling. But once the quiet stops, feeling like a burden, the fire begins to feel warmer. A faint smile crossed her lips, unbidden. That's a clever way to put it. Not clever, he murmured. Just honest. She let her eyes drift back to the fire. The dancing flames seemed softer now, less demanding of her attention. Do you find it hard to trust strangers? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, stretching one booted foot toward the hearth. Not hard, he said finally, but slow. Trust should be earned, not handed out like bread on market day. Then I wonder, she said quietly, how long it would take me to earn yours. The question surprised even her. She felt her cheeks warm, not from the fire. His eyes flicked to hers, steady but not unkind. Perhaps you've already earned a measure of it, simply by asking. She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. And you? How would one earn your trust? By staying, he said simply. Most don't stay long enough to bother. Perhaps they had reason to leave. Perhaps, he conceded, but I've learned some people run not from others, but from themselves. They sat for a while, listening to the fire crackle, to the faint footsteps of the tavern keeper upstairs, to the wind rattling a loose shutter. May I ask you something? He said suddenly, his voice low but not hesitant. She glanced at him. You may. You wear no ring, yet you carry yourself like someone who has known love and loss. She inhaled softly, the air catching in her throat. You see much for a blacksmith, she said. I see much because I listen, he replied. And because I have known the same. The fire had burned low by the time they began to speak. For a long while, they had sat in silence, both listening to the crackle of embers and the soft hiss of wet logs drying in the heat. It was not an uncomfortable silence, not yet, but it hovered there between them like something waiting to be named. The widow shifted slightly in her chair, pulling her shawl closer about her shoulders. It's a good fire, she said softly, her voice tentative. Strong and steady. The blacksmith looked at her, his hands resting loosely on his knees. "A good hearth is like a good heart," he replied. "It doesn't ask for much, just fuel and air enough to keep it alive." She smiled faintly at that, though her eyes did not lift from the flames. And yet, not every heart keeps burning. Some go cold no matter how much you tend them. His gaze lingered on her profile, the way the firelight traced the curve of her cheek. "Perhaps they were given the wrong kind of fuel," he said. "Some hearts burn brighter for a time, but aren't built to last the winter." The widow's smile faltered. "And what about yours? Is it the sort that lasts?" His lips twitched at the corner, though there was no amusement in his expression. "It's been forged in heat enough to make it stubborn." "Stubborn, but still human." "Human," she echoed, almost to herself. "That's a dangerous thing to be." "Only if you expect not to feel." A hush settled again, this one softer than before. She was the first to break it. "Do you ever grow weary of forging?" He looked mildly surprised by the question. "Of metal?" "Of people," she clarified. "Of shaping yourself to them, or them to you." He thought for a moment, his brow furrowed faintly. "I think we're all blacksmiths in our own way, but most people are afraid of the fire." She met his gaze then, and it struck her how still his eyes were. Not cold, not unfeeling, but still in the way of someone who had learned to keep the world at a careful distance. "You speak like a man who has lost much," she said gently. "And you speak like a woman who has as well," he returned. The widow looked away, her fingers tightening on the edge of her shawl. Loss has a way of hollowing you out. You keep living, but you feel as though the best parts of you were carried off with the one you loved. "And yet," he said, his voice low, "you sit here still breathing, still speaking to a stranger." "Perhaps," she admitted, "because I am tired of speaking only to myself." The blacksmith's expression softened. He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on his knees. The firelight caught the faint scar along his jaw, a pale line she hadn't noticed before. "I was married once," he said, not looking at her now, but into the fire. "It wasn't long. She fell ill the second winter after we wed. I thought, if I worked hard enough, if I kept the forge burning and the house warm, I could somehow keep her here. But fire can't cure what lives in the blood." "I'm sorry," the widow said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he replied simply. "So am I." They sat in silence again, though this one felt different, thicker, heavier, but not unkind. "Do you miss her still?" she asked after a time. He drew in a slow breath. "I miss the way she used to laugh when I brought home bread that was too crusty to chew. I miss the sound of her singing to herself in the mornings. But no, I don't miss the ache. The ache has grown quiet." "That's a mercy," she murmured. it is. And you? He asked gently. She hesitated, staring into the fire until her vision blurred. I lost my husband 2 years ago. It wasn't illness or war. It was the river. He said nothing, but his steady presence seemed to invite her to go on. He was crossing in early spring. The ice broke under him. Her voice caught. They found his hat 3 miles downstream. The blacksmith's fingers flexed slightly where they rested, but he didn't speak. The house has felt empty ever since, she said softly, even with all the windows open and the hearth burning high. Because it isn't the house that makes a home, he said. She glanced at him, startled by the quiet certainty in his tone. It's the presence of someone who sees you, he added. Someone who calls you back to yourself. For a moment, the only sound was the fire shifting on its grate. You seem to know much of such things, she said. Perhaps because I've known the lack of them too well. They fell quiet again, but the silence no longer felt fragile. The flames shifted, sending a spray of tiny sparks up the chimney. The widow watched them rise and vanish, one by one, into the dark. The blacksmith broke the silence softly. The river, he began, then paused. Do you still walk by it? She shook her head. I can't. I've tried. Even in summer, when the current is gentle, it feels too loud, too alive. It's as if it's mocking me for what it took. He nodded faintly. Water can be cruel that way. It carries things off and never asks permission. Do you fear it too? She asked, curious. Not fear, he said after a moment's thought, but I respect it. I grew up near the sea. I've seen waves take men stronger than I'll ever be. It taught me early on, some forces are not meant to be fought. Like grief, she murmured. His eyes flicked to her, steady and dark in the firelight. Yes, like grief. The widow shifted in her chair, resting her folded hands on her lap. When people see me now, I think they see only that I've been left behind. A woman alone in a house too large for her. They don't ask if I wish to stay alone. Do you? He asked quietly. Her lips parted, then closed again. The question hung there between them, weighty and tender. I thought I did, she admitted. But now, she let out a soft, rueful breath. Now, I'm not sure if it's solitude I long for, or simply the quiet that comes when someone is near enough to share it. He leaned forward, the firelight catching in his eyes. There's a difference between loneliness and peace, he said. Most folk can't tell one from the other. And you can. I've had plenty of both, he said simply. Outside, the wind had calmed, though the tavern walls still creaked faintly as they settled into the night. Somewhere overhead, a guest shifted in their bed, floorboards groaning beneath unseen feet. Do you ever wonder, the widow asked softly, what it would be like if we carried no past behind us? If we were unmarked? The blacksmith's gaze didn't waver. It's the marks that make us strong. A blade without a few hammer strikes is just raw metal. She let out a faint laugh, surprised and a little shy. Do you always speak in such forge-wrought wisdom? Only when someone's listening. Then perhaps I should stop. He smiled, not broadly, but with a quiet warmth that curled through her like the embers curling around the logs. Don't, he said. You have the kind of listening that makes a man want to keep talking. The widow's fingers toyed absently with the edge of her shawl. I can't remember the last time I sat with someone this way, without expectation, without noise. Noise? He asked gently. The kind people make when they're afraid of silence, she said. They talk and talk to fill it up, as if silence itself might bite them if they sit still too long. And I haven't filled the silence? No, she said, her voice softening. You've only shared it. They sat like that for a while, sharing the silence, letting it settle over them like a blanket. The fire crackled inside, and she thought for a moment that she could hear the sound of her own heartbeat echoing faintly in the quiet. May I ask you something? He said finally. She looked at him. You may. Why did you come to the tavern tonight? She hesitated, because the house felt too large, too empty. And why stay so long? Because, her voice caught faintly, because I didn't want to go back just yet. His eyes softened. And here, you find yourself seated across from a man with soot on his hands and scars on his jaw. She smiled faintly, though her cheeks warmed. Better a man with scars than one who doesn't know how to bear them. The blacksmith leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. I don't know that I've borne mine well. You're here, aren't you? She said. That I am. Then you've borne them as well as any man might. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet shift of the fire. Tell me, she asked softly, when the forge is cold and the work is done, do you ever grow restless? He tilted his head, considering. Sometimes. There are nights when I sit in the dark and feel my hands twitch for something to hold, something to shape. And yet, his voice deepened slightly. Tonight, I feel no restlessness. Why not? Because I've found something I'd rather not disturb. Her breath caught faintly at the edges. The firelight danced over them both, painting warm tones across his weathered hands and her pale fingers. He noticed then how her hand had fallen loosely against the arm of her chair, and for the briefest moment he wondered if he might cover it with his own. But he didn't. Do you believe in second chances? She asked suddenly. He blinked, surprised by the question. Yes, he said after a pause, but not in the way people think. Life doesn't hand them to you like a gift. You have to take them for yourself, and you have to risk that they may not be as easy as the first. Do you think you're ready to take such a chance? He looked at her then, not just at her face, but into her eyes, into the question she wasn't yet asking aloud. Perhaps I already have, he said quietly. She felt something shift in her chest then, an ache that was not unpleasant, but deep and new. They said nothing for a long while after that, the fire whispering between them. And when they finally rose from their chairs to leave, two strangers, no longer quite so strange. The air between them felt different. Not a promise, not yet, but a possibility. I have held so many hearts in these rooms, some who stayed only a night, others who lingered for a lifetime. But that night, it remains warm within me still. And you've come seeking warmth too, haven't you? Sit closer to the fire. The world can wait.